Welcome back to another explainer. Okay, let's jump right into it. Today, we're talking about the absolute magic of the cafeteria plan. Look, if you have ever wondered how you can squeeze more value out of your paycheck by legally bypassing certain taxes, or if you're an employer trying to put together a bulletproof benefits package, you are exactly where you need to be. We're going to map out the blueprint of Section 125 of the Internal Revenue Code. We'll break down exactly what it is and, more importantly, how you maintain strict compliance so the IRS stays happy.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the Section 125 basics, followed by the tax advantages and benefits. Then, we are diving deep into the three really crucial IRS compliance rules: the Uniform Coverage Rule, the Uniform Election Rule, and the Uniform Interval Rule. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how to maintain plan compliance and what happens when things go wrong.
All right, Section 1, the Section 125 basics. Let's start right at the foundation and define exactly what this IRS code actually does. At its core, a Section 125 cafeteria plan is a separate, written plan maintained by an employer. And the name cafeteria is literally a perfect metaphor. Picture yourself walking down a buffet line. The employer hands you a menu, and you get to choose between at least one taxable dish, which is usually just your regular cash salary, and one non-taxable qualified benefit dish.
Now, you might be thinking, what's the big deal about having a choice? Well, normally, in the eyes of the IRS, if your boss offers you a choice between cash and a health benefit, just having the option to take the cash triggers a little trap called constructive receipt. That means the IRS taxes you on the money even if you chose the health benefit. But Section 125 is your safe harbor. It is literally the only way an employer can offer you this choice without those benefits automatically becoming taxable. It's a total game changer.
Let's move on to Section 2, Tax Advantages and Benefits. So what exactly is on this menu, and why does it save you so much money?
Here are the qualified benefits you'll usually see. We're talking accident and health benefits, health FSAs, dependent care assistance, HSAs, and even group term life insurance up to $50,000. Because you contribute to these through salary reduction agreements, they are incredibly tax efficient. These amounts are completely wiped clean of FICA, FUTA, Medicare tax, and income tax withholding. It is a massive financial win for both the employee and the employer. To put some real numbers to this and ground it in everyday reality, let's look at dependent care. Under a Section 125 plan, you can generally shield up to $5,000 of dependent care benefits from your taxable income every single year. But hey, it's the IRS, so we have to be precise. That $5,000 limit is strictly chopped in half to $2,500 if you're married but filing a separate tax return. And if you go over those limits, it gets reported right back on your W-2 as standard wages, subject to all the usual taxes. Section 3, the Uniform Coverage Rule. Now we're pivoting from the benefits to the boundaries. This is where compliance gets really fascinating. Let's introduce the first of our three major guardrails. Let's play out a hypothetical scenario. Can an employee overspend their health FSA? Imagine it is January 2nd, the second day of the plan year. You elected to put $2,000 in for the year, but maybe $50 has come out of your paycheck so far. Can you go to the doctor, incur a $2,000 medical bill, and get fully reimbursed right then and there? Believe it or not, the answer is yes, and this perfectly illustrates the Uniform Coverage Rule for health FSAs. The IRS says the full amount of your election must be available to you at all times during the plan year. You have full access to that entire bucket of money before you've even contributed a fraction of it from your paychecks. And the employer absolutely cannot accelerate your payroll deductions just because you submitted a massive claim early on. Quick side note though, this rule explicitly does not apply to dependent care FSAs, just health FSAs. So you're probably thinking, doesn't the employer lose money if that person quits in February? Yes, they do. That creates a very specific dynamic of risk and reward. The employer takes on the risk of mid-year terminations. They legally cannot recover those spent funds. They just eat the loss. But on the flip side, this is balanced out by the famous use it or lose it rule. At the end of the year, any unspent funds are forfeited by employees, which creates an experience gain for the employer. The IRS essentially designed this whole thing to mimic a traditional insurance risk pool. Moving right along to Section 4, the Uniform Election Rule. This second compliance rule is all about preventing executive favoritism. To understand this one, we first need to know who the IRS is watching like a hawk. Enter the Highly Compensated Participant, or HCP. For non-discrimination testing in 2026, an HCP is an officer, someone who owns more than 5% of the company,
or an employee earning over $160,000 in the prior plan year. The uniform election rule essentially says you cannot give these highly compensated folks a larger employer contribution for the same health plan that a regular employee is eligible for.
So, what happens if an employer really wants to sweeten the deal to recruit a top executive? Well, the discriminatory way is to just pay 90% of the executive's premium and 70% for everyone else. The IRS will flag that as non-compliant in a heartbeat. But there's a totally compliant workaround. The employer keeps the premium contribution at 70% across the board for literally everyone. Then they just give the executive a standard, taxable raise. The executive then uses that extra cash through the Section 125 plan on a pre-tax basis to pay their share of the premium. It gets them to the exact same financial position, but it solves a really complex compliance puzzle perfectly by the book.
All right, Section 5, the Uniform Interval Rule. Let's look at our final uniform rule, which dictates the timing and consistency of your contributions.
Here's a super common real-world scenario that HR professionals hear all the time. An employee knows they're quitting in March, or maybe they just got a massive bonus, and they ask, hey, can I just front-load my entire annual HSA or dependent care FSA out of my next 2 paychecks?
The answer? A firm no. And that's because of the Uniform Interval Rule. If an employee elects a $4,400 HSA contribution for the year, and the company runs on 24 pay periods, the employer has to take a ratable deduction of exactly $183.33 per paycheck. The IRS demands consistent intervals. Front-loading through payroll is simply off the table if you want to stay compliant. Now, if an employee really wants to front-load an HSA, they can do it with their own after-tax money outside of payroll and claim the deduction on their tax return later, but they'll completely miss out on those sweet payroll tax exemptions.
Finally, Section 6, Maintaining Plan Compliance. We've covered the basics, the benefits, and the 3 big uniform rules. Now let's talk about the real-world stakes if you drop the ball on compliance.
Let's get real for a second. These rules are not mere suggestions. If the IRS audits an organization and finds that a plan is discriminatory, say you violated that uniform election rule and hooked up the executives with a better premium, the consequences are brutal. Those highly compensated participants could have all their pre-tax contributions retroactively reclassified as taxable gross income. All those tax advantages completely vanish in a puff of smoke, leaving the participants with a massive and unexpected tax bill.
So, we're going to leave you with this final thought. A Section 125 cafeteria plan is an incredibly powerful tool for shielding your income from taxes, but it absolutely requires operating strictly within the lines of the uniform coverage, election, and interval rules. So ask yourself, is your organization's benefit blueprint truly compliant, or are your pre-tax perks actually at risk of a retroactive tax bomb? It might be time to pull out your plan document and take a closer look. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and we will see you next time.